pizza with graduate students also, and I think I learn as much or more from those sessions than they do. Before I start, I brought a little can of maple syrup for John. I hope I can entice John and his wife Beverly to join us in Vermont and experience more of that little token.
Thank you.
This looks like a reasonably informal group, so having shown proper respect to you all and to John by dressing in an unaccustomed fashion, I'd like to take off my jacket and relax a bit. Actually, even at the age of 82, I find that the fewer clothes I have on, the more fun I'm having. So. My wife Jo of 58 years can attest to that.
Is the mic working?
Can you hear me? Raise your hands in the back of the room if you can't hear me. You cannot hear me back there. Is that better? I'll try to stand closer to this mic. Thanks. Well, it's a huge honor and a privilege for me to open this 20th anniversary celebration of this Institute for College Student Values that John started so well. My comments, and if my voice fades back there, just give me a wave, because I may wander around a bit. I want to try to do four things in my brief comments, and I will leave some time for conversation or questions or comments. First, I want to honor John and his creation. And then I want to recognize my fellow presenters, long-standing friends and colleagues who have, in their own ways, labored long and hard in these vineyards. Then I want to try to provide a bit of historical perspective for our evening panel and ensuing conversations. And finally, I want to share the urgency I feel about the educational outcomes and the values that this institution has stood for and continues to stand for. So it is really a great pleasure to be here in the company of fellow travelers who have invested their personal and professional lives trying to have an impact on higher education that's consistent with the values that John brought to this significant enterprise. I first met Sandy and Lena Aston in 1969, 40 years ago, when Sandy invited me to come to the American Council on Education as a visiting scholar after Education and Identity won the 1969 annual ACE Book Award. And since then, we've shared many collaborative adventures and some misadventures. My own research and writing and professional activism has been mightily enriched by their work as well as by their emotional support. Elena was a valuable and helpful member of Joe's PhD committee, and those relationships continue to be strong and meaningful as we all plug away at trying to encourage changes in higher education in the service of character development and civic responsibility. I remember clearly the first time I met a person who then called himself Art Levine. Now I notice that he introduces himself as Arthur Levine. I was in San Francisco, and J.B. Lon Hefferlin, who was then the higher education editor for Jossie Bass, invited me to dinner to meet this brilliant young newly minted PhD who I learned today was working with Clark Kerr at Carnegie. And since then, I, like many of you, I'm sure, have learned from his contribution to Ernie Boyer's work at the Carnegie Foundation for the advancement of teaching when Ernie was heading that up, and from his subsequent books, and from his essays as Teachers College president. The outcomes he articulated for Bradford College when he was there for a practical liberal education reflected his unfettered mind and original thinking. He invited me to do a workshop there to try to help integrate the whole student affairs arena with the academic side of the institution in the service of those outcomes. And I've applied the basic approach that we use there in a variety of settings since then. And as a Teachers College grad, I've admired his institutional and national leadership to improve elementary and secondary education, as well as make major contributions to higher education. George Koo and I, has George gotten here yet? There you are. Hi, George. Glad you made it okay. He and I first chatted briefly at an AHE meeting shortly after his Involving Colleges came out. A couple of years later, I visited his campus cultures class in Bloomington in the graduate program there, after which he reminds me, I quote, devoured a huge T-bone steak at the little Zagreb restaurant there. Actually, I was invited to meet with graduate students about 10 years later, and what was Mary's last name? Mary Howard Hamilton told me that George had told her that all she needed to do was take me to the little Zagreb restaurant and give me a big steak. Later, Charles Schroeder brought George and me and a few others to his house in Estes Park, where we became founding members of the board to get About Campus off the ground. And in 1999, I was delighted to learn that he invited me to be part of the design team that helped create the National Survey of Student Engagement, NSSE. That initiative aimed to challenge the resources and reputation basis for institutional ratings and recognition exemplified by the U.S. News and World Reports, and that Sandy's research had been banging away at, and his writing as well, for a number of years. And it provides concrete, applicable, readily understandable evidence about actual quality of education, the value added among participating schools and colleges, and the widespread adoption and varied adaptations of that first instrument testify to its power and its impact on colleges and universities across this country and abroad. And more generally, together with the whole assessment movement, it has been a powerful force for helping higher education move toward an evidence-based orientation for strengthening higher education. And finally, both John Dalton and I owe thanks to Gwen Dungy for her support and for NASPA's sponsorship of a series of workshops we did for student affairs professionals around the country. So I want to open this institute by recognizing the powerful contributions these folks have made over the years. Not only because all of us have worked in